I call to order this work session of the King George County Board of Supervisors.
I call to order this work session of King George County Planning Commission.
All right, thank you. We'll start with amendments to the agenda. Mr. Miller, do we have any amendments?
No, sir.
Okay, in that case, we will open it up for public comment. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person in order to afford everyone an opportunity to speak. When you come up, please state your name and your address. And I will start with those who signed up on the sheet. And so, Mr. Ryan Gilchrist.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, supervisors and commissioners. My name is Ryan Gilchrist, and I'm with Open Road Renewables. I'm based in Albemarle County. Can you hear okay with this? Okay. So we've submitted comments on the solar and storage in the past. So I'll start with just some comments on the battery storage. Just highlighting 3 things from our written comments. Number 1, battery storage containers are short and low profile, but making them quote, invisible as required in the current draft isn't really possible and doesn't serve a public interest, especially on industrial zoned land. Number 2, we encourage you to rely heavily on the NFPA 855 standard versus being overly prescriptive in your ordinance. NFPA 855 is regularly updated and covers a range of technologies, which allows you to adhere to the most up-to-date standards, avoiding further updates to your ordinance. And number 3, for sites that are remote, we ask that you allow on-site water tanks to meet the water supply requirement as long as they have sufficient reserve, something like 20,000 gallons. And on the solar side, we attended and spoke at the previous work session, and it appeared that there was a consensus to remove that 1-mile transmission line proximity requirement from the draft. Supervisor Stonehill raised the matter. There was a brief discussion, and it appeared that you all deemed it to be arbitrary, especially given that the lines that connect the solar arrays to the points of interconnection are underground typically. So we wanted to raise this because it wasn't clear if it was recorded in the next draft. And secondly, it appeared that you were in favor of deferring any acreage limitation to the special exception process, as opposed to codifying it in the ordinance, so as to have the opportunity to consider all projects and not preclude a good project with significant county benefit. One of the projects we're tracking is a project that's a little over 500 acres in a nearby county that's projected to bring in approximately $20 million over its lifetime. And this project is spread out, so there are multiple smaller solar fields. So you're not looking at one 500-acre field. And the siting agreement legislation has allowed that project, because of its size, to provide voluntary payments to the county. So in sum, we ask that you codify the 1-mile transmission line requirement removal, and we also ask if you would strike the acreage cap, which would allow you to review each project on its own merits and make a fully informed decision at the special exception. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gilchrist. He was the only individual who had signed up on the sheet, but is obviously open for anyone who would like to provide public comment. So if there's anyone else in attendance that would like to, please feel free to step up now.
Debbie Fairfax, 623 Kings Highway. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, board members, chairman, commissioners. Thank you for taking a closer look at battery energy storage facilities. As you know, I've advocated repeatedly for just 3 specific uses to be placed in special exception in both the current ordinance and in the updated ordinance: utility scale solar, data centers, and battery energy storage facilities. Battery storage facilities are new uses that come with known fire risks and a lot of unknowns. Special exception allows for case-by-case, site-specific evaluation and allows for us to use the most up-to-date data to evaluate. With utmost respect, we were asked to let the professionals do the legwork. Well, Berkeley is back. And the 3 benchmark localities that were suggested by the board all place these uses with a certain power level as special exception or the equivalent. Berkeley recommends that these uses be placed in special exception. And members of the public who have spoken on this subject have all implored you to place these uses in special exception. No one has advocated otherwise. There is unanimous consent. There seems to be no legitimate reason not to place these in special exception. Other localities have had these be allowed only by special exception. So the idea that developers could go somewhere else and get a get out of ordinance free card doesn't hold water. The evidence doesn't support that. Localities are covering their own backsides. Additionally, Berkeley has come back with suggestions to increase setbacks, bury most on-site utility lines, avoid wetlands, add distance from vegetation due to fire risk, screen on all sides, and fence inside the screening. These are all good suggestions. When those that are deemed the experts and those that are living nearby, where applicants have proposed these uses, both strongly urge you to add to the ordinances and to place battery energy storage facilities in special exception, please use common sense and err on the side of safety. Thank you for your consideration. May you be blessed with wisdom, insight, and strength of mind and body as you serve. And I thank you for your service.
Mr. Dines, do we have anyone online who would like to give public comment?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Did any of my colleagues or anyone from the Planning Commission receive any correspondence to be entered into the record as public comment? Okay. In that case, I will close public comment and we'll move on to the presentation by the Berkeley Group. So we'll start with battery storage facilities.
All right, thank you for having us back. For the record, I'm Rebecca Cobb with the Berkeley Group, and I have with me Tori Haynes, also with the Berkeley Group, presenting tonight. Tonight, we are going to just kind of very briefly talk about the process to date, and then we're going to dive into battery energy storage systems, talk about our research and recommendations, and hear from you all in terms of any changes you would like to make. And then we'll talk about power plant research and recommendations and hear from you all in terms of changes for the drafted ordinance. And then we'll get into next steps for this update project. So in terms of the project so far, we completed our initial investigation, public engagement, and we have completed a first draft of the ordinance. And from that, there were several items that you wanted to revisit. And so we had one meeting already covering 3 of those topics. And then tonight, it's battery energy storage and power plants. And any changes that you might want to make related to these might have some impacts to the draft of the use matrix, the use performance standards, and community design standards. And so we will incorporate those, and once those changes are completed, we will move into the adoption phase, which includes a public open house so that the public can review the draft, provide comments on the draft, and then we have 2 pre-adoption joint work sessions scheduled where you all can discuss the full ordinance and any changes you'd like to make, discuss what we hear from the public, and any changes related from those comments. And then we will incorporate all of those revisions, and then it'll be time to set public hearing to again let the public speak on the draft and then potential adoption. So as I mentioned, you did want to revisit a few topics. Tonight, we are looking at battery energy storage and power plants. What we did for these is look at planning research, sort of best practices that we see and from what we get from the APA, and then looking at other communities and comparing what they have done. And then from that, we have provided you all with some recommendations, looking at what the proposed draft is with all of this research, And then we'll get into the discussion, and then we'll make those text edits according to your decisions tonight. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Tori, who's going to talk through our research and recommendations.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having us here tonight. We'll get started on the battery energy storage systems. This is just a brief recap of some of the items in your memo. So energy storage, it applies to a diverse set of technologies that store energy at one time and make it available during another. Growth of renewable energy sources like solar and wind has called for more flexible energy system options. So the battery energy storage systems have been emerging as one of those solutions to increase that flexibility. They are able to quickly absorb power, store it, and then re-inject it as needed. Electrochemical energy storage technologies include numerous battery technologies. They vary in density, power performance, cost, and charging durations. Utility scale battery storage systems have typical storage capacities ranging from around a few megawatt hours to hundreds, so there's wide variation there. And of the different battery storage technologies, lithium ion has emerged. You've probably heard those terms thrown around, as well as sodium sulfur and lead acid batteries. These can all be used for grid applications. From a planning and zoning perspective, battery energy storage systems have many of the same considerations that we talked about last time for industrial uses. So we're looking at screening and sound attenuation, warning signage that is consistent with electrical code, fire codes, setbacks and spacing. So that includes your setbacks not just from property lines, but also spacing between individual battery units, mostly for fire safety in that regard. Fencing, similar to some of the topics last time, so security fencing and how to buffer that. Vegetation and buffers for screening, as well as fire safety considerations. The communities chosen for us to look at are for Virginia Beach, Hanover County, and Prince George County. They all had some relatively recent ordinances get passed in the last year or two. So Virginia Beach, we'll start with definitions. They have one singular definition where everything is defined under energy storage facility. That's similar to the approach that we'll take in your ordinance. Hanover and Prince George followed sort of a New York model where they have two tiers, tier 1 and tier 2, with tier 2 being the more intensive. For use permissions, for the heavier tier conditional use special exception across the board, we did find that those tier 1s are permitted in all zoning districts, kind of by right or as an accessory use. But Virginia Beach, with it being conditional use in industrial districts, is similar to the approach we'll take later. Setbacks, we saw 100 feet show up for two of our benchmark localities. One of them in Hanover just defaults to the underlying zoning district, so there is a bit of a range. Lot size wasn't addressed across the board, but we did see one locality where we talked about the tier 2s need to be at least 5 acres. Fencing, in Virginia Beach, fencing is allowed, but standards were not specified. And then in Prince George County, we did see the 7-foot security fence requirement for their tier 2 facilities. Screening and vegetation varied across the localities. We have a 15-foot landscape buffer in Virginia Beach, not addressed in Hanover. And in Prince George, it was sort of the inverse. It was requiring that all vegetation within 20 feet of a facility or a unit actually be removed for fire safety purposes. Noise was not addressed in Virginia Beach, but in Hanover and in Prince George, kind of along the lines of the things we talked last time, right around those high 50s and low 60s decibel limits. And from a safety perspective, here we're mostly thinking fire safety. Across the board, we saw some language that calls for all facilities to comply with building and fire safety codes, electric codes, anything at the local, state, or national level that would apply. And then we also do have some additional requirements in Prince George where they call out site access and coordination with the fire department. So right now in King George's ordinance, we have proposed to have battery energy storage. It's in the community, excuse me, it's in the performance standards of Article 7. So right now we have it proposed to be by right and industrial, but we have expanded those into including agricultural. Basically, this lines up with your utility scale solar, but we have revised it to require a special exception in all allowed districts. For utilities, we did have some language in there on public water. We wanted to also include an additional clarification that on-site utility lines be placed underground. This is some language we saw in your benchmark communities and thought it would be a good fit here. For screening, we wanted to, in addition to what we've already called for, which is screening and landscaping in compliance with Article 8, your community design standards, we wanted to clarify that all facilities would be fully screened on all sides from view, and then also adding the provision for the 20 feet of cleared vegetation in between units. We also wanted to add some clarification to the location-related language. We do have some language in there right now that requires siting of facilities toward the interior of the lot. We wanted to, again, add in 20 feet away from vegetation, and then also add a provision that's similar to what we've put into your ordinances from our last meeting with solar and some of the other topics, to add a provision to avoid wetlands, floodplains, and environmentally sensitive areas. For security fencing, we do already have a requirement for 6-foot security fencing. We are recommending to add an additional provision to place that fencing behind landscape buffers and screen from view, since they will be more utilitarian styles of fencing. And for setbacks, we did add in a 100-foot setback from all property lines to be a little more consistent with what we're seeing out of benchmark localities and recommendations. So that was the brief summary of what we've got in your memo. We'll now open it up for a discussion of these topics. We can start with the use permissions, where we go from by right and industrial to special exception in A1, A2, and industrial.
Okay, so use permissions where we're starting.
Mm-hmm.
How does everyone feel about the recommendations?
I'll go first.
Go ahead.
Special exception.
Including industrial, you're saying?
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Collins? Okay. Planning Commission? Feel free to weigh in.
I'm wondering what the state regulates already. What EPA dictates, what the state has in place. Are we in alignment with that? Are we beyond that? Because I'm sure if battery storage, the EPA is going to have something to say. And that's going to be dictated to the states. So I'm wondering where we fall with respect to the requirements that may already be levied by the state. Are we duplicating it? Are we bettering? Are we?
Sorry,
Where do we
just
fall?
trying to. In terms of use permissions, it's our understanding that at the local level, through the zoning ordinance, these types of uses can be either by right or special exception to give some local zoning control to it, but there are some state regulations that grant the power, so we can check on that if there's more specific detail you're looking for.
My question is really going to be probably for a lot of what we discuss here, because I'm just wondering if we're duplicating anything that's already a requirement.
Might be something that might look to the county attorney to see if, in general, if these uses, if anything's come up in state code.
Yeah, that's something that I can look into and get back to you.
I just have one question / comment. I would just simply prefer to see whatever standard we adopt for battery energy storage essentially dovetails what we're doing for solar power so that they're not out of sync, because those two things are basically, they go together, they go hand in hand. So whether they're a special exception or by right, et cetera, I'm not overly concerned either way. I'd just like to see those things essentially dovetail. However we treat solar with utility scale or smaller than utility scale, I'd like us to see do something more or less in line with that on energy storage. That's it.
Mr. Collins, you have something else?
Could you comment as to whether we do have alignment in the treatment of solar and battery storage, generally speaking, throughout?
We did look at utility scale solar and tried to line those up a little bit more to be more compatible, specifically with utility scale solar, since that's probably the most applicable type of solar within your ordinance that is proposed right now. So things like the use permissions, making those line up with utility scale solar, making sure that there's not going to be by right for one and special exception for the other. We wanted to make sure that those do mesh together well.
Go ahead, Ms. Bender.
Yes, I would also agree. Both utility scale solar, I've been very vocal on the state level about that too. It should not be by right. It should be by special exception. So I 100% agree with everything you put up there, especially the fire buffer, because as we've seen in other places, when a battery storage system where batteries catch on fire, you basically just have to let it burn out. So there needs to be some protection for those around that, if it gets out of control, they have some protection.
Mr. Merrick?
I'm good with SE on all of it. I think that's a good idea. The only, and I don't know if we're there yet, the only one I had questions on is around RPA. Can that be used in the buffer or not in the buffer? Because with runoff and things, if you have battery storage, I think we should make the RPA outside the buffer. Just so you're not building right up to RPA and using the RPA as the buffer.
Right.
I think the
Right.
RPA should
And-
be outside the buffer because of runoff and things like that.
And we can specify that. I think right now the text doesn't clearly state that, but we can do that if everyone's agreeable to that.
Ms. Kupka?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for joining us this evening again. So I took a look at my notes from the last time we were all together with regard to solar. And the recommendation was editing within Article 6 use matrix, the solar energy utility scale use to require a special exception in the I in the industrial district. So that seems to me consistent with the recommendation that you're bringing tonight, recommended revising the use permissions for battery energy storage facility to special exception in A1, A2, and I. Thank you.
Okay, unless anyone else has anything about use permissions, I think there seems to be agreement based on the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Moving on to utilities. If you'll remember in the text, we do have some things in there right now about water supply. We did not address the utility and electrical lines. So this is language basically addressing to put it underground and just making sure that that base is covered.
Ms. Bender?
I would agree with that, especially driving recently in Prince William and seeing those huge utility poles that are for data centers. And Those are the ones I saw, but I'm assuming you need large ones like that. So underground would be good.
Does anyone have any concerns with that, or Ms.
Do I
Flatley?
press this button? Okay.
Yep.
I just had one question about the 100-foot setbacks and the hydrant or well access. My concern was if you've got the hydrant on the west side of the property, but the egress is on the east side, is there, are we taking that into consideration? Because all it says for the water supply is it has to be available to the property.
Right, they would need to do an emergency action plan that's going to show how the water that's there can be served and fight the fire that's on this side as well as that side. So that would be something that is going to be in that plan that would be considered when that gets submitted.
Mr. Collins?
So on fence height, the only thing that I would do with that is actually add 8 foot instead of 6 foot. You don't want children to be able to get in there, and most of the power companies are 8 foot because of those reasons.
Okay, sure, we can increase that.
Okay, so everyone seems amenable to the proposed text with the underground transmission lines? Okay.
And then going into screening and landscaping, one of the provisions that's already in the text, we wanted to clarify fully screen on all sides from view. When we reread it, we did realize there could be instances where there's a side that did not require screening, so we wanted to close that loophole. And then add in the provisions we were seeing in the benchmark localities, as well as the best practices calling for that 20 feet around not just the facility, but individual units. So making sure that, basically the outer perimeter of the units would all be clear of combustible vegetation.
So I'm going to ask if anyone has any changes they'd like to see to it, because I think there's I'm sorry. And I certainly appreciate everyone echoing that they agree with it, but if we all think it's a good idea, let's move on. And so unless someone has something they would like to see changed, please speak now if you do. Okay.
All right, great, thank you. So going into location, again, we've added that 20 feet away from vegetation just to drive that home, make sure that there are no instances where there would be vegetation nearby, and then added in avoiding wetlands, floodplains, and other environmental concerns. And so this is where we can add some specificity about the RPA, either here or in the buffer language. We can make sure that that's clear.
Okay. Anyone else have anything else about the location definition?
Just the definition of avoid. I mean, they can come close, pretty close, within 10 feet. Yeah, just the avoid, I think, is rather open.
Okay.
You can just add outside the setbacks. I think we're clear.
Okay, so we can add some specificity there.
Okay. Anyone else? All right, fencing.
Right, great, thank you. Fencing, so I heard 8 feet. We did want to clarify in general to place that security fencing behind the buffer and screen from view, similar to a recommendation from our last meeting. But then, yes, right now the requirement is 6 feet, so we can increase that to 8 feet. That's the will of the board.
Is everyone amenable to going to 8 feet?
And that's inside the buffer.
Right, it would need to be inside and screened from the or screened by the buffer. Yes.
All right, I think 8 feet's good.
All right, and then setbacks. This is the provision to establish a setback of 100 feet from all property lines. Again, this is dual functions of screening as well as one additional fire buffer from adjacent properties. If something were to happen, you would have that increased setback, hopefully preventing any interaction with the neighboring property.
All right, I think we're good.
All right, that takes us through battery storage in record speed.
I'll
So
just
we'll-
ask, did anyone else? I don't have anything else about battery storage you would like to address before we move on to power plants. Okay.
Great, sure. So power plants, we'll start again with just a brief overview of our research. And I do want to mention we focus on hydrogen most specifically. Number one, that's been relevant here in King George in your considerations. There's also just growing and emerging trends, both at the federal and state level, pushing hydrogen. So we do think that localities in general are going to be seeing more of these applications, but do keep in mind that the actual ordinance provisions that we're suggesting would apply to any other type of power plant. But considerations for tonight, hydrogen is an energy carrier that can be used to store, move, and deliver energy produced from other sources. There's growing federal and state support for hydrogen facilities. That includes the Inflation Reduction Act at the federal level, as well as the state Virginia Energy Plan. They all are calling for incentives and other motives to bring hydrogen to Virginia. There are various methods for producing hydrogen. You can use renewable resources, non-renewable resources. There's a variety of methods that all have their own impacts and uses. But the methods involving natural gas right now are currently the most common. And if you're hearing about hydrogen facilities anywhere else, it's likely that they're using natural gas as their main fuel source. Some land use considerations for power plants. They're often grouped with civic uses, but are more akin to industrial use impacts. So we wanted to bring that into the industrial use light a little bit and separate them out. So we want to think about building appearance, landscaping and buffers, screening, setbacks, noise and light, safety considerations, whether that's fire safety, and also safety in terms of fencing, keeping people out from the dangerous equipment, as well as water usage, which can vary depending on the type of technology used. So the communities that were chosen are Fauquier and Louisa counties. They both have some experience with power plants. They both tend to lump power plants in with that public utility or utility service major definition. So it doesn't only cover power plants, it's also covering a broad range of public utilities. There are special exception or conditional use across the board. Louisa does have a bit of a broader zone range. It can be in pretty much most zones, but with the conditional use permit, Fauquier has limited it to agriculture and their heavier industrial districts. So through that special exception or CUP application process in Fauquier, we're looking at addressing hours in operation, traffic impact, building appearance, drawing of the proposed system, and statement discussing the reasons for selecting the particular site. In Louisa County, again, similar, this is their general CUP application requirements, but they need to address abatement of noise, smoke, and dust, establishment of setbacks, buffer and screening provisions, and mitigation of other impacts that might affect community character. The buffers in Fauquier tend to range from 20 to 35 feet, depending on certain conditions of the site. In Louisa County, they have a 100-foot buffer for all industrial uses. Noise, I did want to throw this in here since it was relevant last time, but in general, we're seeing noise limits that are very consistent with what we talked about last time and as well we'll address tonight. So currently, King George County does not permit power plants within the current definitions. In the proposed ordinance, currently, we have lumped power plants in with utility service major. We have revised that now to pull out the electricity generating facilities portion of that definition, pull it out into its own definition. And we've pulled language from our benchmark localities as well as some industry definitions that were recommended to come up with one that hopefully is very encompassing of all power plants, but will not impact data centers, battery energy, or solar facilities. Those would remain separate just to prevent any confusion. So as proposed currently, we have utility service major as a special exception in all districts. That wouldn't change, but pulling out the electricity generating facilities, we did put that as a special exception just within the industrial district. For use standards, we don't have specific use standards proposed right now in Article 7 or 8, but they would need to comply with the general community design standards of Article 8. Excuse me. So we have recommended to establish some use standards in Article 7 for electric generating facilities, and to establish additional guidance and preferences for facilities utilizing renewable energy resources and carbon neutral production methods, if you so choose. That specificity would be well placed in your comprehensive plan. So right now, in our application requirements for special exception, some of the things that they would need to address, proposed use would be in harmony with the underlying zoning district. There would be no undue adverse impact to the surrounding neighborhood, and the proposal meets all other ordinance standards. We have proposed to add some additional requirements very specific to electricity generating facilities, similar to what you saw last time with utility scale solar, data centers, the things that have their own actual standards spelled out in Article 7. So again, in summary, as we're looking at power plants, we wanted to make sure we pull out a definition specifically for it and make it special exception in the industrial district.
All right, we can go down the same road. And is everyone amenable to that? If anyone would like to see something different, please speak up.
I'm wondering why it's allowed as a special exception in all districts and not actually limited to special exception in industrial only, because that would give us a rezoning to approve if it was anywhere but industrial.
Correct. The idea was to keep it within existing industrial sites or get it to where it needed to be rezoned. And as it's in an industrial district, our thought was also that any of the related industrial standards that we've talked about to date would be triggered. If we put it elsewhere, we may need to work with the language a little bit to make sure the same standards would apply to different areas.
Well, I think it should be limited to industrial only, and if it's special exception in industrial, that's fine. But this is an industrial use. I mean, the good thing about solar, large-scale solar is it essentially preserves a lot of the land. After the decommissioning, it can be reverted to agricultural land again. Power plant probably can't.
Okay. So just to clarify, we do have it as proposed as special exception in the industrial district only. One of the benchmark localities allowed it as a special exception in multiple districts, just as a point of comparison, but that's not what we've proposed here.
It looks like you are based on the sheet. I'm looking at page 25. King George proposed power plant standards.
So that's showing the current standard, but they're in the last column under recommendations, there is a change that they're saying to make it so it's only by, so. Yep.
So just to be clear, industrial only, special exception only, and this is a new definition for power generation.
Correct.
So anything that would have been approved before under power generation doesn't fall under this definition, I would assume, right?
Well, as it stands now, it's our understanding that power generation is not a use that's permitted in the county at all. So I'm not
Okay.
sure what, or the power plant that was here must have predated the current ordinance.
Right.
One that's out of commission now. But yes, anything that would have been under utility service major, we've tried to pull out all of the electricity generating facility aspects into this revised ordinance text, and it would be completely separate.
Okay. Ms. Bitter?
Yeah, I just have a clarifying question on the last part of the definition. This usage does not include, what is that? Why is it separate? I'm just not understanding that part.
Because those items do have their own, for example, solar facilities, wind facilities, some places could define it with power plants, but those have their own standards. And the power plants as defined here would have separate standards that wouldn't overlap with solar or wind.
So this is just basically for those that are strictly power plants?
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Unless anyone else, anything else, I think, oh, Ms. Flatley, go ahead.
And I could have missed this at some other point because I'm new, but do we have any ordinances for any mobile power facilities? I know that's something that's kind of up and coming, the mobile nuclear site. No, okay.
Okay, so everyone though is amenable to the current proposed changes. All right, I think we're good on both definition and use permissions as you've recommended them.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so moving into this portion of the power plant discussion, it will get a little more detailed. Since there are no existing or proposed text, we did create this basically from scratch, although we did try to make sure it lined up with your other ordinances as we've already discussed, as well as best practices and benchmark localities. So your memo has the full range of this language. We did summarize a few points here for intent and compliance, but basically we have proposed some standard language for the intent of the ordinance, how it applies, as well as compliance. We wanted to make sure we pointed out local, state, and federal regulations. We're thinking fire codes, electrical codes, and the various, I mean, with power plants, there are many different codes at all levels that may apply. So we did just want to capture that. And then we moved into height limits and setbacks. With height limits, we proposed that the maximum height of a principal structure or the accessory structures, such as towers and smokestacks, may exceed the height of the underlying zoning district as it's conditioned in the special use permit. So we didn't spell it out here specifically, but we did add in a provision to allow you through that special exception process to consider height exceptions where it may need to be a little bit taller. And we were thinking most specifically, there are stacks and certain appurtenances that are just naturally very tall. They're likely to not meet any particular height ordinance. But we also wanted to leave that at a case by case, so you all can decide that as you go. And then with setbacks, we did add in the 100-foot setback from all property lines.
Can I make a comment? This one I'm a little uncomfortable with, and if it would tend to hem us into 100 feet, I'd like to see some wiggle room in there for taking this up in the special exception discussion, kind of the way you did in number 3 above. So maybe something shall be at least 100 feet from all property lines or more as conditioned in the special exception permit, something to that effect. We don't want to be hemmed into 100 feet on this. Yeah.
In the sense that you're okay with increasing 100 feet, is there any desire to come below 100 feet?
No desire to come below.
Okay, so 100 feet or more as conditioned in the special use.
That would be my preference, yeah.
Great, sure. Thank you.
Is anyone else amenable to Mr. Fox's recommendation? Okay. Any other input on either of these 4 items that we have up here? Okay, I think we're good.
Getting into, we'll start with buffers. So we did line this up to match a little bit on the industrial uses that we discussed last time. We wanted to specify buffer type C and alternative buffer berms as the options for the buffer to make sure that there was clear screening and that it was adequate for the site. And then some provisions requiring the buffer to be maintained for the life of the facility and to preserve existing forest resources. For coordination with local emergency services, again, we wanted to make sure that we had something in there that points them to getting together with your local emergency services and coming up with something that is approvable for your fire department and EMS. And then groundwater monitoring, we wanted to make sure we had something in there to govern groundwater monitoring. There may be other requirements through their various federal and state permits that also require that, but we wanted to make sure that the county is also included on that and that you're on a time schedule and are getting copies of those reports. Are there any comments or questions on these items?
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Cup?
with regard to number 6, I wondered if the group would be amenable to adding a clause after owner or operator shall coordinate with King George County Fire Rescue and Emergency Services to provide, comma, at the owner or operator's expense, comma, materials, education, and or training on how to safely respond to on-site emergencies. I feel like if our Fire Rescue Emergency Services Department is going to be burdened by having some type of facility such as this here, then they ought to be willing to foot the cost that our fire department would need to put out.
All right, Ms. Cup has made the proposal. How does everyone feel about that recommendation at least?
Well, I feel fine about that recommendation, but I also want to add in King George, the Sheriff's Office and the Virginia State Police in case there's any terrorists. So they should be coordinating with all emergency services because it's not just a fire that would be of concern there. It's also other events that might take place in those facilities.
So maybe say after Fire Rescue and Emergency Services and or King George County Sheriff's Office? That work?
Any other state law enforcement agency. In your provision in there.
Yeah, question. So when you say, I guess, addition, how much more? I mean, is it services that they're only going to use or is it services that the entire county? So what I'm saying is, if you're asking them to do this, I'm not saying that I don't think that they should foot the whole bill if you're gonna ask them to do something. I think the county should share it because we're going to share in utilization of these services, would we not?
So I guess my counter to that would be, this is for a power plant. So if there aren't any other power plants, then why would we put this burden on our community when the only site is this one here?
Is it specifically for the power? Or will it be for the entire county?
My understanding is that this section is the carve out specifically for, it's not called a power plant now, it's called an
electricity generating facility.
Electricity generating facility. So this would be unique to that type of facility. Yes.
So it would be a fire station specifically for that section in a county,
not necessarily a fire station, but require specialized training and equipment to respond to this one facility, type of facility.
Then I can.
Yeah, the text says respond to on-site emergencies, so it's about training for those particular emergencies. Mr. Collins, could you, I couldn't hear you when you were talking about the additional services that you wanted to ask. Could you say that one more time, please?
King George County Sheriff's Office and state law enforcement agencies.
Thank you.
Mine is on number 5B, existing forest resources. What shall be preserved? So what is the clarification? And where I'm asking that is, as I've stated before, there's a difference between an 80-year-old vegetation and a meadow and small plantings.
The idea would be the vegetation that falls within the buffer as defined. But if there is additional clarification, if you're looking for preservation of specimen trees specifically, or some other provision for mature trees, mature vegetation, we can specify that a little more.
That's why I'm asking if there was an older stand of trees, having that being part of the buffers, I would think would be a good thing to preserve because it would also block it a little bit from the sight lines.
Maybe existing vegetation that meets the buffer requirements, something like that.
How about just the existing forest resources? So it always says what's already existing. So it doesn't lower the standard.
Right, that meets the screening requirements, meets or exceeds.
Yeah, I just was wondering, just leaving it as forest resources, is that too vague? Because that could mean many different things.
Sure, yeah, I see that point. Yeah, we can, I think, specifying that it meets the type C requirements, meets or exceeds, that way it can help specify that a little bit better on what type of vegetation that is counting towards the buffer, that they wouldn't have to be planting new.
All right, thank you.
So why is it 5 years and not less than 5 years?
Are we looking at groundwater monitoring?
Yes.
5 years was taken, I believe, in looking at some other language that was similar. But if there is a different increment of years that would fit better, we can certainly adjust that.
1 or 2?
Okay. Is there a preference on 1 or 2?
We may need to track what the Virginia Department of Health and DEQ would require too. So that, I don't know that 5 years is the standard that the county needs to adopt, but it may be more than what Mr. Collins asked for. So I think we would have to just check on that.
Okay, it's okay to adopt more than the health department wants.
Sir, I was just saying, when you said 1 and 2, we may need to be a little higher on that because they may require more than that. More.
I mean, more than like every 6 months? Is that what you mean by more?
No, I thought I thought you had wanted to lessen the standard to 1 and 2 years.
No.
Maybe I'm sorry. I misunderstood.
Groundwater monitoring shall take place every 1 year of the operation of the project and upon completion of the commissioning. 1 or 2.
All right, 1 or 2. How do people feel? 1? Everyone else in favor of 1, or is anyone in favor of 2?
I think 1 is sensible, and also I don't want to do anything that forecloses or limits our right to inspect at any time we want to inspect groundwater. I mean, it should be once a year automatically without any red flags. But if we have reason to believe that we want to inspect more frequently, we should not be foreclosed from doing that. I'm not saying that this does that. I just want to make sure we're not inadvertently creating that impression. I mean, if there's an environmental red flag of some kind, whistleblower, what have you, there should be no doubt at all the way this is constructed that we can require, an inspection or measurement on whatever 72 hours notice or something like that.
Okay.
On that type of facility, DEQ is going to be able to go in whenever they want, and the wells are there. They just pull the cap and test it.
But sometimes the first line of defense is the county. That's my point.
So 1 year, I think we've all agreed that let's do 1 year.
1 year?
Yep. So every year. Okay. Does anyone else have anything else among these 3 items up there right now?
I want to talk a little bit about number 6 some more.
Go for it.
Coordination of local emergency services. It's not, the way this is written, it's not real clear on when all this is going to happen and how it's going to happen. It could be after approval, it could be after construction that they're required to coordinate with fire and emergency services. It's just not clear how and when. And I'm wondering if we don't want to get emergency services a little more buy-in up front with some approval to the plan. maybe even a separate plan just for fire services and how this is all going to be accomplished.
Yeah, I want to dovetail on that because I was thinking about that after you said it. And another concern is, since these are all new technologies, different things might change. So maybe giving a briefing or some kind of language that they have to keep the fire and sheriffs abreast of any new technologies they have in their plant. Because if they've been trained one way and then something gets added, they wouldn't know about it.
So, Mr. DeVries, your question about when this occurs, this would also be part of the emergency plan that they would develop and submit with their application. So you all would, be able to consider that and make sure that it's appropriate.
Who would consider that? Just the board and the commission?
Yes, it's
'Cause
part of the application.
Again, I would like to get some buy-in from emergency services for review and recommendations to both.
So when they submit the application, it would go through the special exception process, which means it'd come to the planning commission for a public hearing as part of that application. And then again, it would come to the board after the planning commission sees it again with another opportunity to put eyes on it and have comment upon those kinds of concerns.
And ideally, your emergency services could certainly be acting as a reviewer if they're not already for all special exceptions. At a minimum, you could be bringing them into that review process for the special exception for the power plants.
That's what I'm talking about.
So when we're receiving the application, it would immediately go out to the fire department, sheriff's department, any other agency that would be involved. And that's our standard practice.
So that would be accomplished before it comes to the commission or the board.
Yes.
And would we see their comments?
Their memos are included in your packet.
Okay.
If you want to put a framework in, would it prior to commencing operation and every 5 years afterwards? That would probably be fair on that. I don't know. What you guys think?
Are you speaking to number 6? So if there's new things that occur where the emergent training is required because of some new understanding, is what you're saying? Okay.
Training before you start operation, so they have a framework there, and then every 5 years after. I don't know what the standard is.
Best practices if
Right.
things change. Okay. Is everyone amenable to that change? Okay.
All right. Moving into security fencing, this is another one where we've specified 6 feet, but we can raise that to be consistent with battery facilities if you'd like. And then we also have a provision in there for warning signage, pretty much just to cover that base and making sure that it's in conformance, whether it's NFPA, the National Electric Code, ANSI, making sure that there's standard signage at all entrances and on fencing is needed.
So I think the fencing height, I think probably everyone would be amenable to 8 feet
8 feet, we can raise
based
that.
off
Yeah.
the discussion about battery storage. Does anyone else have anything else about security fencing and warning signage? Okay.
Okay.
I think it looks good.
And now we're moving into, these would be additional requirements for the special exception application. So in addition to whatever is standard in Article 3, we wanted to make sure we pulled out a few extra things similar to utility scale solar and some of those other things that have their specialized special exception application requirements. So that includes the pre-application meeting. And there is additional language in your memo specifying things like the pre-application meeting and the neighborhood meeting, and then the project narrative, which identifies the applicant, facility owners, site owners, all of the major players in the application. It describes the proposed facility, it includes a site plan, and there are some specifications in there for that site plan, the construction schedule, visual impact analysis, the community impact assessment. That would include things like your fiscal assessments, your environmental impact assessment, a traffic study, the emergency operations plan, and the decommissioning plan and surety. So again, that language is all spelled out within the actual memo, but we'd be happy to pull any of these items for further discussion.
Mr. Collins, you had something?
So the only thing missing there is noise.
As it's since it would be industrial, it would automatically fall under the industrial noise standards that were discussed last time. So it's not included in this text, but it would apply upon adoption of the ordinance.
Do you want to add something here just to reference the noise standards so that it's clear connection to those? Is that?
Yes,
Okay. Okay.
I have a question on the neighborhood meeting. Is that in all of our categories? Because I didn't remember that. Was that in solar? Was it in data center? Was it in all?
I know that it's in solar because that's a typical one that we include.
Because I think it should be in all of them because in most other localities, they require a neighborhood meeting of the applicant.
We do already in Article 3 talk about a pre-application meeting and kind of, you can't require it for all permits, but we, suggest that it's a good idea. And so I would imagine your staff, the first time someone calls and says, this is what I want to do, she's going to say, come in and let's chat about that. Did I buy enough time, Tori?
Forgive me, my memory is that we don't have it in data centers. We don't have it specified in data centers the way it's specified in solar. That's my recollection.
Well, my recommendation should be in all of them in the same way.
Sure. So for the 5 industrial uses in general that we've been talking about, we can definitely make sure that that language is consistent across the board.
Thank you.
Mr. Collins?
So what is a neighborhood meeting? Is my neighborhood, Fairview Beach neighborhood, what is it by district, James Monroe? What's a neighborhood meeting?
So it says in the notes that the public meeting shall be held to give community an opportunity to hear from the applicant and ask questions regarding the proposed project. The meeting shall adhere to the following, and then there's a list of 5 items. So it's on page 29. If you want to, you can read through the whole thing if you want, but.
So would you like some more specificity about like proximity to the project?
Well, so neighborhood meeting should be by district, at least by the district that it's in.
Okay.
But there should be one held in every district because it'll be a utility for the entire county.
So it does require that they advertise this neighborhood meeting. And so anyone, in the county who sees that could respond and could attend.
So those advertisements are usually not very good. Usually they come and go and people then say, we didn't know anything about it. So it's very important to have the buy-in. That's why I'm being so specific about the neighborhood buy-in.
So I'm wondering, at this point, what's the difference between a public hearing and this neighborhood meeting?
So a neighborhood meeting would just be a general community meeting. It would not have any sort of formal interaction with the board or the planning commission. This is probably something that would be on site in someone's neighborhood or at some other public facility that's been rented for the discussion, and there would be no formal action.
So it's an informational meeting for parties that are interested.
Correct.
I wouldn't just the parties that are within a certain boundary. I think the county is the boundary, so it should be in.
So that's what I'm agreeing with. I'm agreeing that it's open to those that are interested.
And so the details in there do go into saying things like the meeting shall give members of the public an opportunity to review application materials, ask questions of the applicant, and provide feedback. So it's not like in a public hearing where people stand up and say their 3 minutes and they have that opportunity, but there's no back and forth. So this sounds more like an opportunity to have discourse about the project and back and forth between citizens and the project developer.
Right. Typically, this is, it's coordinated by the developer. Citizens come voice their concerns. And the hope is that through this meeting, the developer listens to those concerns and accommodates those in the ways that they can and improves their application before that it comes to you all for public hearing.
Yeah, then I'm agreeing that we'd want to put it in more than just power plants.
I just have one quick question. Looking under page 29, it said advertise a newspaper record in the county. We don't have a newspaper. So how can we fix it has to be the Freelance Star?
Nobody reads the Freelance Lie.
We can add to this that they have to post signs,
Okay.
out like at the property or something like that.
That would be great, because I'm just thinking a lot of people, without having a county paper, it's very hard to, you can't assume they're going to read the Freelance Star.
So back to my,
Mr. Collins, I think your point was if the project's in Dahlgren, we don't want to have this community meeting in Hofstad
well,
to make it regional to that project.
I don't want to make it regional to that project. I want it to be the entire county be able to, in other words, at least you have town halls in every district. It doesn't stop somebody from Dahlgren to come to my town hall, but I think that everybody should have the opportunity to be within their neighborhood to be able to,
So requiring a minimum of 5 meetings, that would be 1 per district, is that correct?
well, 4.
4.
Mr. Chair, could we just change section B, instead of saying neighborhood meeting, just call it a public meeting? Because everyone does have the opportunity to attend, regardless of neighborhood or district, if it's just a public meeting. And then I would also suggest in section 2, B2, newspaper of record in the county by the applicant, comma, at the applicant's expense, comma. So it's very clear the county is not going to pay for their newspaper advertisement. It is on the applicant's burden. Thank you.
The Freelance Star doesn't need to
Mr. Collins,
deliver.
come in real quick. I would recommend leaving it as neighborhood meeting, since a public meeting is very different from what neighborhood meeting would be. You don't want to conflate the two terms.
I would dovetail it and say, instead of newspapers, saying social media, since that's where the majority of people now get their information, or to at least include it.
So just to reiterate my stance, the Freelance Star doesn't even deliver in King George anymore. So, a lot of people do not go online to read the Freelance Star.
Does the King George County website have a bulletin board space anywhere for postings?
Yeah, nobody reads
Like
any of
this,
this.
just out of curiosity.
What would be the language for a sign on the property or signage on the property? Can that be added in?
We can't, excuse me, we can do that. Usually, I can probably use language that's similar to telecommunications. There's like balloon flight advertisements, so it shows location, date, time, cancellation, makeup date, that sort of thing, and topic about what it is talking about.
I know we require a lot of signage when we have a public hearing, so maybe not that much signage, but at least a couple of signs on the property so that those that might not read the internet or social media or the Freelance Star would see that, hey, I need to show up here because something's coming.
How about if it's on Lambs Creek Church Road and I don't drive down Lambs Creek Church Road?
So could you go old school and just say you could mail a flyer to everybody within a 20-mile radius of the property?
Mr. Chair. That's me. Down here at the end, the quiet.
Go ahead, Mr. Stono.
Yeah. Looking at some of the things that we were talking about, neighborhood meeting, I would definitely leave as. I think it's a much more informal, like you said, a public meeting that you can go back and forth. Signs like we have to do for our public notices on the, we already have signs, and we have for public meetings and things like that. I think that would be fine. We do have a new PIO, and they could also be required to put that out on social media for the county. And to speak on Mr. Collins, I think doing 4 different town hall or neighborhood meetings, I think is a little bit of a hardship. Like it should just be the one district that it's in. I think that should be fine. Thank you.
Who is that a hardship on? The company?
The company, whoever, Mary Washington, whoever's hosting the meeting, all that kind of stuff. Staff.
I'm worried about a hardship of somebody that's coming here to make money.
How's everyone else feel? I'm only in favor of the one meeting. People can come to the one meeting. It is open to the public. We can try to get the word out as much as possible, but at the end of the day, people to some degree as well have to kind of be engaged and just, either checking the website and we'll post it there. I can appreciate maybe not everyone reads the Freelance Star or is looking on social media, but hopefully we'll hit one of those. If it's posted signs, that's usually when I start hearing from people, hey, what's going on? I saw signs posted. So hopefully that would be something I think that would be helpful. So I think that having a couple of different avenues would be good. I don't know how you capture every single person though. That gets tough.
I think we got to look at it too. It's in the applicant's best interest to get as broad an attendance as possible for when they do make any adjustments to their plan, so they can explain it to us in public forum.
I'm okay with the one meeting because we also have Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors it's going to go through. I think we should put it on the website with these types of meetings, and I think we have a couple of concerned citizens that would help spread the word.
I agree with Mr. Myers, one meeting. Thank you.
Okay. I think we have a majority who agree with one meeting, but it might possibly including some more verbiage about making sure that we have more avenues of advertising. All right. Does anyone have anything else about the application process that's been proposed here? Okay.
That concludes our discussion on power plants.
We're going to check. Who's going to go next? So next steps, we have finished up the topics that you asked us to take a look at. We will be incorporating those edits, and then we're looking to schedule a public open house in July, and we will be working with staff to set that date and location and advertise that so that we get plenty of public participation. And then after that meeting in July, we will return to you all for 2 joint work sessions. We will bring to those meetings what we hear from the public, and we are expecting you all to bring any additional changes or thoughts that you want to discuss for your drafted ordinance.
Okay. Does anyone have anything else before we move on? All right. I think we're good to move forward with the open house in July.
Thank you.
All right. Does anyone have any other business to bring before the board or the Planning Commission? Okay. I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to adjourn to Tuesday, June 6, 2023 in the boardroom.
Second.
I have a motion properly second. Do we have any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Chair votes aye. Motion carries. We're adjourned.
Have a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion that the Planning Commission adjourn until Tuesday, June 13th, 2023.
Second. All in favor?
Mm-hmm.